San Francisco. The air inside the Castro Club hung heavy, thick with the mingled scent of sweat and perfume. The disco ball's light bounced off the ceiling, the rhythm shaking chests. People lost themselves on the dance floor, as if living the freest moment of their lives. And then that voice arrived. That high, angelic, impossible falsetto. When You Make Me Feel Mighty Real began to play, time seemed to stop. Everyone knew who was on that stage: the cape, the feathers, the platform heels. But nobody knew that behind that stage costume stood a man who had spent hours staring into mirrors, convincing himself he could do this. Sylvester's magic wasn't just in his voice. His magic was in that battle no one saw. He carried his shyness like a weapon, polished his fear and brought it to the stage. And in an instant, the world began to dance through his eyes. Before we continue with this remarkable story, please subscribe to support more deep dives into music history's most fascinating figures. Los Angeles, late 1950s. In the narrow streets of the Watts neighborhood, in a small house on 114th Street, Sylvester James Jr. was growing up quietly. He watched the world outside his window, but didn't dare go out. While other kids played in the street, he stood in the corner, hands in his pockets, eyes cast down. His mother, Letha Weaver, understood her son's shyness but worried. Because out there, in 1950s America, being different wasn't easy. Especially if you were a black child. Especially if there was another voice inside you. But everything changed in church. At Pentecostal services, when the music started, Sylvester transformed into something else entirely. That small, timid boy, when he began singing gospel songs, seemed possessed by another soul. His grandmother Julia, the powerful woman everyone called Juju, noticed something in her grandson. This voice wasn't normal. This voice was a gift. When he first sang Never Grow Old at age 3, everyone in the church froze. Because that voice sounded less like a child's and more like angels singing. Gospel culture didn't just give Sylvester a voice. It taught him a language, a form of expression, a survival strategy. The concept of service in church, the idea that music was an act of worship, a tool of transformation, became etched into his mind. Years later, he would describe his performances on disco floors as service. Because he wasn't just singing. He was trying to elevate people, to transform them. But church was also the source of his greatest pain. At 13, he was kicked out of the church for being unable to hide his homosexuality. That community had given him voice, had nurtured him. Now it was throwing him out. This rejection opened a deep wound in Sylvester's heart. But it also taught him something else: if no one accepts you, you must create your own world. 1962, 15-year-old Sylvester began going to Los Angeles gay clubs. Not just to watch. To perform. Because he had discovered something, the stage was his safe space. When the lights hit, when he wore the costumes, when he applied his makeup, he was no longer shy Sylvester. He was someone else. Someone stronger, braver, freer. During his high school years at Jordan High School, other students found him strange. His speech soft, his movements feminine, his clothing different. But Sylvester didn't care. Because he had found his mask. In 1965, at his graduation ceremony, he walked onto the stage wearing a blue chiffon dress. School administration was shocked, some parents reacted angrily. But Sylvester stood there, head high, smiling. Because for the first time, he felt truly himself. During this period, he formed a group called Disquotes. The name itself was a manifesto, a combination of the words disco and queen. The group performed in Los Angeles' underground scene. But even here, Sylvester didn't feel free enough. Because Los Angeles was still too conservative. Still too judgmental. He wanted more. Greater freedom, a more radical stage. And in 1970, he found that stage, San Francisco. When he moved to San Francisco, Sylvester stepped into a new world. The Castro district was the heart of the LGBT community. People walked hand in hand in the streets, nobody hiding, nobody ashamed. And most importantly, the Cockettes were there. This avant-garde theater group was turning everything upside down. Gender boundaries, artistic understanding, performance rules. They were chaos and freedom embodied. A friend, Reggie Dunnigan, invited Sylvester to join the Cockettes. The first rehearsal shocked him. Because here, everyone expressed themselves completely. Ridiculous costumes, exaggerated makeup, boundary-pushing performances. For the first time in his life, Sylvester felt like he truly belonged. He started living with the Cockettes in a house on Market Street. The house was total chaos. Music, dancing, creative sessions until late at night. No one woke up in the mornings, they spent hours preparing in the evenings. Sylvester thrived in this environment. Because now no one told him to be quiet. No one told him to be normal. Everyone told him to be more. Within the group, a subset of black members known as the Chocolate Cockettes formed. Sylvester was a pioneer here too. Because he wasn't just queer, he was also black. And in 1970s America, carrying both identities simultaneously meant double marginalization. But Sylvester turned this into power. He combined his gospel-rooted voice with drag aesthetics. He blended the exuberance of black church culture with the freedom of the queer underground. In 1971, the Cockettes went to New York. They would perform at Anderson Theater. This was a huge opportunity for them. Because New York was the capital of the art world. Names like Andy Warhol, Truman Capote, Rex Reed would be there. But the performance was a disaster. Because the New York audience didn't understand San Francisco's spontaneous, chaotic aesthetic. They expected something more professional, more polished. Sylvester stood on stage, the group delivering a terrible performance. And at one point, he grabbed the microphone and said, "I apologize for this travesty that I'm associated with." Thus, he maintained loyalty to the group while separating himself. This moment was a turning point for him. Because now he understood, he could do more. He could be a bigger artist. After returning to San Francisco, Sylvester left the Cockettes. Now he would walk his own path. In 1972, he formed Sylvester and his hot band. They made a mix of funk, soul, and blues. But this time, Sylvester wasn't just a performance artist. He wanted to be a serious musician. They started playing local clubs. Jules Catch 1, The Stud, The Palms. Every night, a different venue, a different crowd. But Sylvester now spent hours before taking the stage. Choosing his costumes, doing his makeup, adjusting his wig. Because when he stepped on stage, he had to be perfect. Because he wasn't just a singer. He was a vision. But things didn't progress easily. He struggled to find studios to record albums. Because record companies didn't understand his style. Too feminine, too strange, too risky. But Sylvester didn't give up. Because he felt he knew something inside, whether the world was ready or not, he was ready. In 1973, he recorded his first album. But sales were disappointing. Music critics said his voice had an uncomfortable dissonance with guitars. One critic wrote that his voice had an unpleasantly astringent quality. Sylvester read these reviews and his heart shattered. Because he had worked for years to develop this voice. And now people were calling it wrong. But he continued in the clubs. Every night, on the dance floor. Every night, in front of the crowd. And slowly, he noticed something. Even if people didn't understand him in recorded music, they understood him in live performance. Because Sylvester's power wasn't just his voice. His power was energy. His power was that presence on stage. 1977, Sylvester signed a deal with Fantasy Records. And this time, everything would be different. Because now, he had two extraordinary talents by his side, Martha Wash and Izora Rhodes. Known as 2 Tons of Fun, these two women provided perfect balance to Sylvester's voice. Martha took the low parts, Izora the middle, and Sylvester soared on top with that iconic falsetto. This vocal arrangement came from gospel tradition. Those three-part harmonies from church now echoed across disco floors. And this combination created the depth that was missing from previous attempts. Sylvester was no longer alone. He was a service leader. And Martha and Izora were his congregation leaders. But something else changed too. Patrick Cowley. This young producer was pushing the boundaries of electronic music. He was developing a new sound called high NRG. And when he combined Sylvester's voice with this electronic texture, they created magic. In 1978, the album Step 2 was released. And those two songs inside changed everything: You Make Me Feel, Mighty Real, and Dance, Disco Heat. These songs didn't just become hits. They became anthems for a generation. Because in those songs, there wasn't just an invitation to dance. There was a call for freedom. There was the message: you can be yourself. You Make Me Feel, Mighty Real, was especially powerful. Because in that song, Sylvester's entire journey existed. The transformation from that shy child to the goddess of the stage. That phrase mighty real was exactly his manifesto. Because he had been judged for years for being real. Now he was proclaiming reality as a power. They rose to number 1 on the Billboard dance chart. Playing on radios. DJs put the song on repeat because it was requested again and again in clubs. And suddenly, Sylvester became a star. But this time, a real star. Not overnight, but a lasting star. In 1979, he received the key to the city of San Francisco. When Mayor Dianne Feinstein's assistant Harry Britt brought the key, Sylvester couldn't believe his eyes. Because this wasn't just an honor. This was the city saying, "You're one of us." This was that small shy child finally being accepted. But fame didn't change Sylvester's inner world. On stage he was still that goddess. But backstage, still that fragile man. On the tour bus, he sat silently for hours. In hotels, he stared in mirrors, questioning himself. Because that mask, no matter how powerful, was still a mask. His manager, Brent Thompson, one day presented him with a shocking suggestion that he needed to appear more masculine. Because mainstream media was struggling to market his style. But Sylvester refused. Because he wasn't compromising anymore. He had lived for years according to others' expectations. Now, he would only be himself. His relationship with Fantasy Records was also tense. There were financial disputes. Sylvester was calculated to be owed $218,112, but he only received $20,000. Lawyers got involved, court proceedings began. And Sylvester learned once again, the music industry was a ruthless place. But the biggest blow was Patrick Cowley's death. In 1982, Cowley died from AIDS complications. Only 32 years old. Sylvester lost his closest musical partner. But worse, he glimpsed what would happen to him in the future. Because in those years, AIDS was still a terrifying, misunderstood disease. And San Francisco's gay community was being devastated by this illness. In early 1987, Sylvester was coughing constantly. Feeling exhausted. At first he thought it was bronchitis. But then one day, he went to the hospital. And the doctors delivered the shock: HIV positive. AIDS. In that moment, he felt the world stop. Because AIDS in those years meant a death sentence. No treatment, no hope. Just waiting. And Sylvester saw that the life he had fought for years was now rapidly coming to an end. But he told no one. Because he didn't want scandal in the final days of his career. But at the same time, he carried that fear too. He didn't want people to remember him as sick. He wanted to be remembered as that powerful image on stage. Months turned to weeks, weeks to months. He grew weaker. Struggled to breathe. But still on stage. Because the stage was his life source. Without the stage, he was just a sick man. But on stage, he was still Sylvester. In spring 1988, he appeared on the Joan Rivers show. And there, he revealed his relationship with his boyfriend Rick Cranmer. On live television. Rick's family learned about it for the first time there. This courage was incredible for that era. Because AIDS stigma was at its peak. People were afraid to kiss, to touch someone who was HIV positive. But Sylvester refused to hide. In the summer months, he gave one of his last concerts in San Francisco. Dreamland nightclub. On the dance floor, familiar faces. Fans, friends, loved ones who had been following him for years. DJ Steve Fabus had prepared a special set. Sylvester's favorite songs, his most iconic moments. Sylvester walked onto the stage. But this time, he struggled to walk. His breath caught. But when he took the microphone, that voice was still there. Maybe weaker, maybe more fragile. But still that angelic voice. The crowd chanted, "We love you." And Sylvester stood there, eyes tearful, but smiling. Because he finally understood, this life, this struggle, had been worth it. November 1988. Sylvester could no longer walk. At San Francisco General Hospital, in the Rita Rocket Lounge, he lay dying. Friends came to visit. Martha and Izora held his hand. His mother Letha was by her son's side. And Sylvester spoke his final words, "Baby, I don't feel good, I might have caught a cold. Don't get too close, I don't know what it is." But the night before, talking with his mother, he made a deeper confession, "I'm not going to make it, I'd appreciate it if you'd stay with me." This was not the voice of that powerful Sylvester. This was the voice of that little boy. The voice of the child who was kicked out of church, left alone, but never gave up. December 16, 1988. In the early morning hours, Sylvester James Jr. closed his eyes to life. Only 41 years old. But the legacy he left behind would last for years. He had planned his own funeral. The music, the speakers, the atmosphere. But he requested one thing, that touch somebody's life not be sung. Because that song was too personal. Too painful. Thousands of people attended the funeral. The streets of Castro filled up. People cried, hugged, shared their memories. Because Sylvester wasn't just a singer. He was a symbol of hope. He was a pioneer who said you can be who you are. He donated all his music royalties to AIDS charities. Because he wanted his own pain to help others. He wanted to be of service, even after death. Today, in 2025, Sylvester's music is still playing. You Make Me Feel, Mighty Real, was added to the Library of Congress National Recording Registry in 2019. In 2023, Rolling Stone ranked him 169th on their list of the 200 greatest singers of all time. He has a place in the Dance Music Hall of Fame. He's an honoree on San Francisco's Rainbow Honor Walk. But his most important legacy can't be measured in numbers. His legacy lives on in every Pride March, on every disco floor, in every queer artist expressing themselves on every stage. In Prince's androgynous appearance, in George Michael's brave coming out, in Bruno Mars's falsetto, his DNA exists. Because Sylvester didn't just make music. He opened a path. He showed that being different was a power. He taught that shyness wasn't a weakness, but a sensitivity. He proved that masks could be used not just to hide, but to empower. That small, shy child made the world dance. On his journey from the gospel church to the disco floors, he never compromised his authenticity. A goddess under the stage lights, a warrior behind the curtain, and ultimately an immortal icon. And today, when we hear his voice, we're not just hearing a song. In that high, angelic falsetto, we hear the echo of years of struggle. In every note, in every tremor, there's the courage of that shy child. He's shouting to the world, I am real, I am mighty real. And perhaps the most beautiful thing is this, behind those stage costumes, that glittering makeup, those spectacular performances, the truest Sylvester was always there. Because he wasn't putting on the mask. He was taking the mask off. And underneath, revealing that fragile, beautiful, courageous soul that we all needed to see. The disco ball is still turning. The lights are still shining. And Sylvester's voice, frozen in time, forever captures that moment of freedom. Mighty real. Powerfully real. Always.